Hi besties, I hope you missed me. I'm here with a video where I read Van Gogh's favorite books, and actually I didn't have to buy any books for this because I just chose the ones I already had. And obviously he was very into the classics because when he was alive the classics were the only books that were already written. So I found a list online compiled by, I think, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, where they talked about all the books he had previously talked in letters and which one he especially liked, and then I just chose 3 of those books. Now, without making this much more complicated, let's just jump right to it and see which book I'll read first. Hi again, you just saw me finish Les Miserables. I have to say, Victor Hugo is very good at writing. Obviously, Les Miserables is a classic for a reason, but I've had the problem that I've encountered a lot of times in classics, that this book, which is 600 pages long, could have been about 300 pages. If you don't know me, I have a serious condition called big book fear, and I usually hate reading long books, but I just basically sucked it up and started reading 100 pages every day, and what do you know, suddenly I finished this book, and I have to say I did really enjoy it. First of all, this book is not offensive to anyone. Victor Hugo just has a way of making everything very serious. It was all very dramatic, but also still positive. This is the story of Jean Valjean and Cosette, who are basically the main characters of this, and I'll try to summarize it really quickly because there's really a lot going on. The girl's mother is Fantine, who was a girl who fell in love with a boy, and they had sex before marriage, and then the boy just left her. And subsequently Fantine had to sell parts of her, literally parts of her. She had to sell her teeth to keep her baby clothed and fed, and she actually gave Cosette to a pair that had a tavern, and they didn't treat her very well. They just took Fantine's money and went off with it. On the other hand, we have Jean Valjean, who I think stole something and then basically had to go to prison and do hard labor, and when he came back he tried to get into society again, but because he had a special kind of passport which was yellow, no one wanted him there, and he ended up actually stealing from a churchman, from a pastor again, but he didn't have him prosecuted, and that's how he started a big trade. He found a cheaper way of making glass and to sell it to Spain and other countries, and he made a fortune with that. But there's a policeman who's basically the antagonist of the novel, one of them, but I think the biggest, Javert, who is trying to get him back to prison. And I have to say to that, I don't quite understand, because when Jean Valjean stole the silver of the priest, he was caught and the priest said no, he gifted it to him, and technically, except for not showing his passport, I don't think Jean Valjean did anything that was illegal, so I don't actually know what grounds Javert did have to stand on at that point. I mean, of course, later on when he goes back to prison and breaks out again, obviously there's a reason to get him back into prison, but yeah, that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Jean Valjean promised Fantine, Cosette's mother, that he would get the child and make sure that she's in good hands, and he does that. Obviously her basically adoptive parents aren't very good to her, and he has to pay them a lot of money to get Cosette, but then they live together and a lot of shenanigans, including Javert, ensue, where they have to travel around all the time. And there's a young lad who falls in love with Cosette when she is beautiful. And there was another thing I'm just gonna flag out, right? There's a sentence where Hugo is like, yeah, it was that time in a woman's life where she got beautiful, where everything happened. And then in the next sentence he says, to sum it up in one word, 15. And I was sitting there like, what the fuck did you say? You know, like the noise that was playing in my head the whole time. And I know that like Victor Hugo was like a bit of a sex maniac. He was like a nymphomaniac. I think, didn't he also send a live bed in an envelope to a lover? Like, he was a little bit crazy, and he obviously had way too much time on his hands to write this. To sum it all up, this book is égalité, fraternité and liberté in book form, basically. These are the themes of the French Revolution, and it's also very revolution core. It's very clear that Hugo likes the revolution, and I mean, I'm on his side. I think monarchy is pretty shit and should never be there. Like, also, if I was an English person, I would not want to pay for Charles' crown ceremony. I just wouldn't want to do it. In terms of why I think Van Gogh might have liked that, first of all, I think the love story probably intrigued him because he had a string of love stories that weren't going so well of his own, and what I know of him is that he's kind of always been a little bit of a hopeless romantic, so I think that is what also drew him in. And as far as I'm concerned, Van Gogh seemed like the kind of person who also aligns himself with those values of the French Revolution. I think he's very much about brotherhood of man and everything. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that he recommended this book, and he spoke very highly of Les Miserables in his letters. Listen, I just finished Candide for the second time in my life, and I hated it as much as the first time, maybe even more. I honestly don't get the appeal for this, but this is so very obviously, I mean, it was written by Voltaire. I'm not a big Voltaire fan, solely based on what I've read in here. Yeah, Candide, it's the story of a boy who grew up in a German castle and misfortunes befall him. And it's kind of, it's a satire, and it plays on themes of if the world is good, if people are good, or if mankind is evil. That's basically how I would sum it up. But there's so much racism in here. Part of this book, or at least the stories some people tell, take place in Africa. And again, I'm not gonna paraphrase any of the things they said in here, but yeah, it fucking sucks. It's super racist. I'm glad I think I got this sent from America when I was 18 because it was the only copy I could find. It's used Bill's bookstore. Yeah, it looks very beat up, and it's not because I've read it so much, I can assure you of that. Also, the way women are treated in this, I don't even want to talk about this. Every woman in this is obviously raped, and it's played for laughs because this is a satire, and I don't know, I just don't find it funny when women get raped. Call me crazy, but that's just the way I roll. So yeah, definitely can't recommend this to anyone. I don't think I'll ever read anything of Voltaire again. I'm so sad that I had to read this twice in my lifetime. I thought maybe I would change my mind and that maybe I misremembered all of those things, but no, I absolutely didn't. And also, there's slight anti-Semitism in there. It's not as bad as the racism, but that's not a standard I want to go off of. And for why Van Gogh liked this, I don't want to know why he liked it. I mean, in certain parts if you overlook all of the rape and the racism, if you just think, okay, that was normal for the time, and maybe if I give him the benefit of the doubt, the rape thing was also satirical. I mean, all of this is a satire, but he states that, oh yeah, this is just what happens in war, and that this is basically a custom, like a tradition, but for the depiction of people of color, honestly, I can't even go with the satire, because it's just what people actually thought of them and sometimes still think of them, which makes this even worse. I hope that Van Gogh maybe liked the parts about mankind being evil or mankind being good, and that he enjoyed the satire about that. I would actually like to look up in his letters what he wrote about Candide, because I'm very intrigued now, and I just hope he didn't like it too much. Like, you might be my favorite painter. No, actually, that's a lie. My favorite painter right now is Matisse, but I didn't find anything about Matisse's favorite books, so I went with Van Gogh. And I actually wanted to go with Monet, but I also didn't find any of his favorite books. So here we are, Van Gogh, your third place. And this is why. This is exactly why. Full disclosure, I did not read this one the whole way through again, because I have read a lot of Macbeth. I actually had to read it in school for my English A levels, so I have marked a lot in here, and I just reread a few passages, and I also, this edition is just the worst. It's so beat up, because look at this. This was in my school bag for like half a year, and it sure looks that way. I don't know what those stains are. I don't think I want to know. I didn't read this again, and I have to say, I'm not a big Shakespeare girly. I know that many people who are interested in literature, and also especially in classic literature, are very big fans of Shakespeare, but I'm not one of them. I think Shakespeare write a woman, that isn't the worst challenge. He fails every time. Obviously, most of classics written by men are very man-centric. Obviously, also, most of things written today, they are all still very man-centric. I mean, the Bechdel test exists for a reason. Reading some parts of Macbeth really reminded me of that, because obviously Lady Macbeth is just a cunning snake. Like, she's my ring. She is such a snake. She is so power hungry, and she does everything, and of course she manipulates her husband, because in his heart he is good, but she is so evil. She's just such a woman. And I think obviously this book does not take into account that there was no other way for Lady Macbeth to fulfill her desire to be something big and to get into power. And I think in history it's a problem in general when we speak about women who intrigued their way to the top, basically, because it was the only way they could gain power. The only way they could gain power is to have power over mighty men. I think the book Lady Macbeth, that I think came out this year by Isabel Schuler, which I really enjoyed, plays more into that. It plays more into the reasonings why Lady Macbeth did what she did, and it gives her a more rounded appeal, like she's a real character and not like a caricature of a woman who is so power hungry. I'm gonna say something really controversial now. I think Shakespeare did quantity over quality like a lot of times. I think Macbeth is one of his better ideas and also executions, because Macbeth has inspired so much media over the years. Actually, one of my favorite Discworld stories by Terry Pratchett is Macbeth, which is obviously a play on Macbeth. And I think for that alone, Shakespeare deserves some recognition, even though he also just found those stories and brought them to the stage. But I think most of the stories he tells are still very relevant to this day, and it's still very interesting to have this motif of power-hungry people, be it now women or men, because in the end Macbeth is also power-hungry, not just his wife. And I think that's also just a theme that is always interesting, and I think in that way it might be why Van Gogh also liked it, because it's kind of also a play on brotherhood of man and what power does to people, and I think that's reflected in actually all three of those books. It's always the struggle of good versus evil in a person, and I think Van Gogh was very much aware that people are not just good or evil, there's a mixture of everything in all of us, and I think that's what he found pretty interesting. So that's all the books I read for Van Gogh. Usually I would read 4 or 5 for one of those videos, but because Les Miserables was very long and I really hated Candide, I didn't want to stretch it, and I also think it's very fun to enjoy books you already have on your bookshelf and read them from a different lens. It's basically like you're putting on a different set of glasses and viewing the world through it, and I think that's always pretty interesting, and I love it if it helps me to understand people. I think it's always super interesting to just see how it might have influenced their views and to find out what links those books together, and I was really glad that there was such a big link between those books for Van Gogh. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did, and I'm going to see you next time.